Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to the first ever Sweet Beet Farm webinar. This is our first time doing this, so um, hope you can stick with us through the whole thing. Should be a lot of fun, and hopefully all of us get to learn a little bit. Um, so I'm Pierre. I'm the Sweet Beet Farm manager, and also the manager of Sweet Beet Farm Education. And this is Julie, and she's going to talk a little bit about herself.
Hi, everybody. So I also work at the farm and on the education team. So Sweet Beet Farm, you probably all know, is a program of the Kearsarge Food Hub, which is on a mission to share local food and farm knowledge. Before we go any further, we just wanted to acknowledge that we're on the unceded traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples, past and present. We acknowledge and honor with gratitude the land and waterways and the people that have stewarded this land and Dakina through the generations. So a little overview of the evening. We're going to start with what and why of grafting. We're going to take a little tour of the space and check out some of the equipment that's used. We're going to do a little demo, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. And a reminder, our favorite Hannah is up there in the chat box, so send things her way and she'll shout it out, and we'll get to all your questions at the very end. So without any further ado, Pierre, to kick off the what and why.
The what and why of grafting. So I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a background of how we got to make the choice that grafting was a good thing for the farm, and why we want to educate others on that possibility. This is actually exactly to the date, pretty much 10 years ago. This spring was my first farming season ever, and so I'm 10 years into this, and it really feels more like it's my first, because of how much I'm still learning in so many ways. This is going to be this is our second year of grafting, and we have learned so much through this process, and I'm sure we'll learn a lot more moving forward. So we at Sweet Beet Farm run a market garden, and in that market garden we use intensive growing techniques, and what that means is growing locally nutritious food with soil health in mind on a small plot of land, and on that small plot of land, try to actually make a living on that plot of land. And so grafting is one of those techniques that allows you to maximize the output of the tomato crop that you are growing. In these market gardens, there are no right ways to run these small farms, but rather models that have been adapted to the environment where they exist. And so that's what's so cool about technology these days, is that everyone has access to all these different models that have been created, and be able to kind of pick and choose and adapt it to your very own local farm and in the local environment in which you exist. When we talk about growing in cold climates such as New Hampshire, we have to talk about protected culture. This is how we extend the season and allow for a longer growing season, and allow for local food to be available for a longer period of time. These can take obviously many forms, from high tunnels to hoop houses to mini hoop houses, using row cover. Even a windowsill will count as a protected culture in so many ways. And these allow farmers and home gardeners to extend the growing season, and even with this power of technology, be able to grow year round. We've been growing microgreens on the farm this year, and this allows us to grow all year round and be able to produce that locally grown food. Again, this produces more opportunity for healthy foods to be produced in our home community, and has a variety of benefits such as youth retention, eating a healthy diet, bringing the community together. But since you're here at a grafting webinar, I don't need to talk too much about why farming is so important. I want to talk quickly about 4 really important resources if you're looking into grafting and if you're looking into market gardening and making a living doing this. Jean-Martin Fortier, who wrote The Market Gardener, is kind of the foundational model for everything that we do. He was the first person we got exposed to. He was heavily influenced by Elliot Coleman, who's kind of the grandfather, if you will, of market gardening, especially in the Northeast and in North America. Curtis Stone is wrote the Urban Farming book, and we are an educational farm, and in so many ways, land access is a real problem these days, and especially in more highly populated areas. And in those areas, you need to make the best out of the amount of land that you have. And again, this is where a grafting technique, as we'll get to, can be really important to, again, maximize the amount of output that you're getting. Ben Hartman is someone else. He actually came to Notetown, New Hampshire a couple years ago. He wrote the Lean Farmer Note, and this is really gives a business sense to the farmer. Farmers, from my experience, can sometimes have a harder time with the business sense of things. I've had to learn that. Ben Hartman's been really crucial in helping get rid of wasting energy, and he talks about it using the word muda, which is translated again, as waste of energy, and doing things that are kind of redundant and take up more time than they should. And in a world where land and inputs are expensive for farmers, and we sell food at a relatively cheap price, it is crucial to have efficient systems for the success of these small farms. Andrew Mefford is another resource, and he wrote the Greenhouse and Hoop House Growers Handbook on organic vegetable production. He was a researcher in Maine for Johnny Selected Seeds and wrote this really incredible book that is catered again to all this protected culture growing, and really details all the different ways you can maximize those spaces. Again, protected cultures spaces are highly valuable in cold climate. This is how winter greens can be grown, and other crops that are heat loving can also thrive. So again, those tomatoes, the nightshades, or the cucumbers, or the eggplants really love that heat creating environment that you find in a hoop house or in a high tunnel, and can really thrive. And again, can maximize the return on investment, and sometimes keep that farmer's operation alive when it is hard to make ends meet as a farmer. And we really want to make sure that farmers are as viable as can be, and can run as successful a business as they can. Obviously, when one talks about high tunnel production or in hoop houses, we have to talk about tomatoes. Tomatoes are that crop. It is such a profitable crop. In all the models that I've been exposed to, tomatoes are the crop where, as a farmer, you can make the most money. And there's many reasons to why that is the case, particularly because in the United States, everyone loves their tomatoes. And so, because space is limited in those high tunnel and in those spaces, it is important to try to think about that soil health and the effects of growing these crops year after year, and the effects that might have on soil health. Some of the problems that happen in those high tunnels could be salinity buildup, because the rain isn't accessing the soil. Because it's covered space, then there can be salt buildup, which can create problems for the crops that are growing in there. And actually, grafting is one of the places that you can select a rootstock that is highly resistant to salinity buildup and can deal with salt in the soil. Soil-borne diseases are also a real concern. For example, at Sweet Beet Farm, we have a greenhouse, which is a heated high tunnel space. And so in that space, because we heat it and that costs a certain amount of money, we have to maximize output. And so for 3 years in a row now, we've grown tomatoes. And when that happens, soil-borne diseases can be more prone to occur. And that can wipe out an entire crop. And like we were talking about viability of farms, if you have your tomato crop that you're planning on making so much out of and then all of a sudden a soil-borne disease appears and wipes out the whole thing, that can be a tremendous hit to a small farm. And so again, when we're talking about viability of farmers, this is really important. Yeah, and like I mentioned, the depletion of the soil of growing tomatoes over and over and taking out those same nutrients. I wanted to give a quick note for the home gardener, and if there's any home gardeners here, and why grafting could also help in that situation. If you have, I've seen a lot of home gardeners with like a little hoop house or just a small greenhouse, and that's the only space that they have. And I think it's to make the choice of what to grow in that very valuable space is something every home gardener comes up to. Tomatoes are a very popular option, obviously, and the difference between how successful a tomato plant is growing in the field versus growing it in a high tunnel is night and day. I mean, you will grow so much more, or get so much more out of a tomato plant in a heat producing environment like a greenhouse than you would in outside, where a tomato plant gets hammered by the rain and the cold and the heat. I don't know if I could say the same thing about the taste. I've heard some farmers, and I'm not sure if that's... there's definitely validity to that the elements can add a certain taste to the tomatoes. But in terms of how well the tomato grows, they grow way better in a greenhouse. And so, again, if you have a very small amount of protected space and you want to grow tomatoes, and you want to keep growing them in that protected space year after year, this can help you. It will also increase the amount of yield that you will get from tomatoes, and will also allow you, like we talked about, to avoid getting a whole crop destroyed by a soil-borne disease. Find my place here. So I want to talk now a little bit about the advantages of grafting, and we've mentioned some of these so far. Obviously, the one is soil-borne disease resistance. You can create a plant that is bred to be resistant to some of those diseases, and again, you can save an entire crop. It's just like an insurance policy. Even if you might not have a soil-borne disease, if you've been growing tomatoes for 3 years, it might be really advantageous if you're counting on that crop to make sure that it is resistant to that disease. Also, plants that are grafted are more vigorous and produce over a longer period of time. I've liked to look at my tomato production through the year when I'm not grafting tomatoes. They kind of take some time to kind of get going, and then just kind of produce a lot of tomatoes all at once and then crash right down. And that's okay, but when you are trying to make a living and fill market orders and whatnot, it is much more advantageous to have a more consistent production of tomatoes. And so that allows for not tomatoes to all come in July and August when everyone has tomatoes, but maybe have some earlier tomatoes and also some later tomatoes. They also, the vigorous rootstock, it can be so vigorous and grow so much better than the regular tomato plant that you can even outgrow diseases sometimes. And I've seen that when the grafted tomato plants are growing so well and there's a little bit of a disease, even the way that mold might come onto the plant, but because it's doing so well, it can outgrow the disease. In a certain way, healthy plants equals less diseases in general, kind of like humans. And so it also can help with cold and hot climates, which is something I found out because in high tunnels you can also get actually sometimes the temperature can get too hot, but rootstocks actually have a much bigger root mass, which allows the plant to be more adaptable in the face of extreme weather conditions, like a really, really hot summer day, and might not shock the plant as much and allow the respiration to still happen properly with the plant. The other part is that yields can increase, and they can increase significantly. Andrew Mefford, who I mentioned earlier, who did his this research in Maine, shows that when I worked at Johnny Selected Seeds, this is him talking, I did the grafting and ran rootstock trials at the research farm. For many of those years, the trials were conducted in an unheated hoop house. Most combinations yielded a 30 to 50% increase over the ungrafted top variety grown as a comparison, and that was without soil-borne disease taking a toll on ungrafted tomato plants. So just from that data on someone who's grown a lot of grafted tomato plants, when you put the amount of effort into the tomatoes that we put in, and you buy the seeds and you start them in a nursery, and you just put all that effort into it, and you can graft them and get 30 to 50% more yield, that in itself is enough to justify grafting. And as well, like in this research, like he was saying, that's without if you get a soil-borne disease that wipes out your whole crop, which is obviously the worst case scenario. I want to talk a little bit about the disadvantages really quickly as well. This will not protect tomatoes from airborne diseases. I really, really wish it did because leaf mold and blight and all those tomato diseases that are airborne and the molds and the funguses can destroy a tomato crop. But this will, an ungrafted and a grafted tomato plant will have the same resistance to an airborne disease. So it doesn't do anything for that. It takes time, it's taken us time every year over the last couple of years as we've done it to set up, to prepare for it, and to take the time to actually graft, which, we did 120 plants the other day, and it took us about a half a day with setup and whatnot. And you do have to monitor monitor the plants and whatnot, which also is a time constraint. There is also because grafting, you have to grow almost 4 times as many tomatoes as you would normally if you weren't grafting. So we needed 90 plants is how many we needed this year for our nursery space, and we started 200 scions, or the fruitive variety, and started 200 rootstock. And so that instead of growing 100 plants, we grew 400 plants. That's more soil, that's more space in the nursery, that's more seeds, and all that is more time and money, and they will pay off, but it's something that's worth mentioning. And and we can, I think, and we can get to why and what of grafting. Is that the good time to do it now? Do you want me to talk about that?
Just say why you had to grow so many plants. That's so many.
Right. Yes, of the merging. That's it. So that's the next. Yep. And so the last thing I wanted to say about that was just that the seeds are getting more and more expensive, and especially greenhouse varieties that have been bred to grow in these greenhouses and have certain disease resistance, like to leaf molds and stuff like that. And so again, when you're grafting, you're going to spend more money. Now, if I could explain to you guys a little bit about how the process starts and the method that we use. We use the top chop method, which our dear friend at Good Earth Farm, Dave Trumbull, taught us. Dave is really the one that's walked us through the grafting process. He's been a tremendous resource and just a fantastic human being. And he does the top chop method and has been doing it for probably 15, 20 years and does an amazing job. And the top chop method means that you take a tomato variety, or what we call the rootstock, which is the one that is vigorous, that has the disease resistance, and you combine it with the scion, which is your fruitive variety. And the fruitive variety has the good qualities of a good fruit. It tastes good. They have a nice shape. There's all kinds of scions. Obviously you can do cherry tomatoes, you can do heirlooms, you can do slicers. And then the rootstock, which ends up being the part that's in the soil, is the part that is more vigorous and has more disease resistance. the concept and the goal of grafting is to take the rootstock that has all these qualities and merge it with the fruitive varieties, so that you, as a farmer, you can harvest the benefits of both varieties. And this is what's so amazing about this process. I must say, it's also, as someone that's witnessed this, it's an absolute miracle that plants can be cut in half and somehow fuse back together. As a farmer, the miracle of life is easily accessible around us and easy to witness. And this is one where we are literally fusing plants together. The process it takes a little bit of skill, but is really not unattainable and is really not that complicated that, again, a home gardener or a beginning farmer couldn't pick up with the right tools and resources. Is there anything else that you think I should explain about grafting?
Question. This is from Edie. With 200 rootstock and 200 scion, you want 100 in the end. Is there a 50% failure rate?
That's a very good question. We're gonna get right to that, to our success rate and our failure rate of grafting. We've been a little bit all over the place, but 50% is that's. We hope that we should be above 50%. Actually, a lot of farmers get around 50%, but oh.
Just restate the question.
Restate, and the question was, why do we have 400 and plants that we grew total, and we're going to only end up with 100? And because we're taking these plants and literally cutting them in half and trying to get them to fuse, there can be a certain percentage that obviously fails, that fail. And so in the best case scenario, which we've gotten up to a 90% success rate, and we have also gotten down as low as 50%. So we grew at least 400, so that hoping that if we do really badly, then we have 50% that are going to survive and make sure that we actually have a tomato crop to grow this year, which is obviously very important. Anything else that I should cover about the
diameters can vary to grow extra.
Right, and maybe we can talk a little bit about the space and how we approach all of this. And can they see the plants really well here? I would say the most in the top chop method, which is again chopping the fruitive variety and putting it on top of the rootstock. The most challenging aspect in the actual cutting them up is matching up the diameters of the plants. The plants can grow at different rates at different speeds based on the varieties, and each variety of tomatoes will grow slightly different. So it is really important that if you're going to graft, to make sure to do a trial run. And so how I do that is start both your varieties, your rootstock and your scion, at the same time about a month before you plan to actually start your grafting seeds, and see after 3 weeks, which is about when you want to graft. After you plant your seeds, 3 to 4 weeks later is when you want to be grafting, and trying to match and have both varieties have the same diameter, because if the stems have the same diameter, then they will have a much better chance to fuse than if they have different size diameters. They still sometimes can. We've mismatched plants, and the miracle of life takes place, and it still happens, but the success rate is much higher if the diameters are close. And so that, again, to reinforce, is really important to do that trial. And then once you kind of observe where they're at 3 weeks, you can kind of decide how many days you should start a variety before. And for us, it ended up that our fruitive variety needed to be started 3 days before our rootstock variety for this combination. And we have a very good example of pretty similar tomato plants that are ready to be grafted right now. And I did say that grafting should happen after 3 weeks after planted the seeds. That is a specific way of doing it, but you can do it a little bit later in the process and whatnot. And there are different clips which we are going to show you, and these clips kind of allow the plants to fuse, and they come in varying sizes, and so that gives you flexibility to be able to graft tomatoes at different sizes that have grown at different rates, or that are taller or smaller. I do want to mention that this is, again, like I said, one method. There's also a side grafting method that can be also slightly easier. Andrew Mefford, the book I mentioned on organic hoop house growing, has a whole section on that. But this is the way that we have done it, particularly because Dave coached us through this whole process. Okay, so I'd like to talk to you. What was that? Oh, perfect. So we were gonna talk to you a little bit about the space and the requirement, and actually how much money is it gonna cost you to get this whole setup going. And it's actually surprisingly affordable as far as I'm concerned. When I first looked into this, I thought it was going to be a huge amount of investment, and it really is not. The basics to the equipment that needs to be used: you need to have lights, except if you have a heated space that you can keep around 65 degrees for the tomatoes to grow. A basement, a room in your house, anywhere that can be kept at 65 degrees is perfect in terms of growing the plants. Once they have been grafted and have been put together, the most crucial aspect of the operation happens, which happens in what we call the healing chamber, and this is where they fuse. And this is where I think we had gotten a little bit lucky. I had gotten from Ben Hartman the idea of making germination chambers in old fridges. An old fridge is really just an insulated box, and in that insulated box I had put a crock pot, and the crock pot releases steam, and so releases heat and humidity, and so which are the two things that a plant needs in order to germinate, and darkness as well. And at least for most seeds, what I realized is that using that exact same method, I could really create a wonderful environment for a tomato to heal, and so right next to me, and I don't know if we don't have to, maybe, as long as it doesn't. But this is our healing chamber, and it's just an old display fridge that does not work anymore, that would have been just thrown out. And inside of it, there is a waterproof heater and a little humidifier that just releases steam. I think it's a Vicks brand. They're both very cheap, under $30 to get a heater and the humidifier. And they are attached to these sensors that sense the humidity and the temperature. And so we set our temperature in our healing chamber to 78 degrees Fahrenheit, and we set our humidity to about 95 to 98%. And so this allows the plants to be in the most conducive environment for healing. Johnny's and other growers use domes to put on top of their plants while they are healing. This can be effective, but this is and it can be effective to do it that way. But if you can find or do a setup like this, you're just going to create a much more optimal environment to have them thrive and heal. The sensors also, and maybe we could send out, the sensors are really, these temperature sensors really, and humidity sensors are really key to this whole thing, because that's really what controls the humidifier and the temperature in there and keeps them at really a constant rate. Perfect. We will send out a list of all the equipment that we use and where we got it, so that's if you're interested in doing that this year, you can go down that direction. We have obviously mentioning the grow lights as well. These are bigger grow lights that are necessary. You can get cheaper lights. We had gotten those a few years back. But that's one expense. You need some clean cutting equipment, and we can show our hydrogen peroxide, which is our sterilizer. This is very important, is to have a clean and sterile environment when you are grafting. Because you are cutting plants in half, they are susceptible to disease, to certain molds and whatnot. So we really make sure to wash our hands, to wash our equipment, and to make sure everything is sterilized and clean. And that is very, very, very important for the success of grafting, and really success in the long term of these plants. And yeah, there's some clips, obviously the clips that bring the plants together, and the stakes as well. We are going to show you guys how we do this top chop method and how we take these plants. I want to talk briefly about this little tool right here. And I can, sure. This little tool is fantastic. You can go to Johnny's and get it. And what it does, is that it allows to get the same. Oh, there you go. Right there. It allows to get the same angle over and over as you are cutting the plants. The plants actually get cut closer to a 45-degree angle, which increases the surface area and the cross section for the two plants to kind of merge together. It is really important to have a consistent angle when you're cutting the plants and trying to merge them together. If you cut the rootstock at a 35-degree angle and you cut the scion at 65, those two are going to have a hard time merging. This tool really gives you a good guide to be able to reproduce the same angle over and over. So, Julie, do you want to do the honors to... Oh, that's the Johnny's product, yeah.
What size clips are you using?
For this round, so we have actually a few different sizes of the clips. We have 3mm clips, 2.5mm clips, and we also have 2.0 and 1.5mm. For when you are grafting 3 weeks in, my experience has been that you are using 2mm or 2.5mm clips, and that will do 95% of what you're trying to do. If you let them go for 4 weeks, that's when you get into the 3mm clips, 2.5 to 3mm. So Julie is going to cut the rootstock first, which is these four. So again, when we're doing this, and this is the tricky part, and this year I was really lucky to do it with two of my awesome teammates, one of them being Julie, and someone would try to match the diameter of the rootstock with the diameter of the scion. And so the way we would do it is, there's Julie cutting it, and now she's going to take the top of this and go to the scion, which is those four right here. This is the fruitive variety that will result in a round, beautiful, red slicing tomato. And she's going to go and try to match up the diameters of the stem. And that seems like a pretty decent match right there. And now she's going to discard the top of the rootstock. Don't want to mix those up. That is correct. We have never grafted a scion or a rootstock on top of a scion yet, but it would result in very poor tasting and poor looking fruit. And let me see. How's that look? Right. And so let's see, what kind of clip do you have? Is it a 2.5?
How do you know if it's the right size?
Ooh, there he goes. And so to pick the right size of the clip is more of a feel thing. They don't want to be too tight around the plant stem, but they don't want to be too loose either. And this one is a 2.5mm and seems to fit just snugly enough that it's not too loose, but it's also not bulging out and making the clip just kind of come out of its, yeah. And so Julie now is going to put the scion on top. And those two, and watching the angle and trying to match them up and putting them, joining them together. Yeah, that looks beautiful. And so we usually have a little support stick. Where's the? Oh, it's right here. Yeah. And what is nice, something that can happen with these tomatoes when you put them into the healing chambers, they can kind of topple all over. So having a little bit of a support stick or a toothpick works as well, can be really helpful as they heal. And so that is how the grafting happens. It's an easy process. The three tricky parts really are, number one, growing the plants to be around the same diameter and matching them up, making sure that your angle is as consistent as possible. Using that tool really helps a lot, in my opinion. And then creating the perfect environment for the grafted plants to heal. And so that's what our healing chamber is for. Again, a 95% humidity environment with a temperature of around 78 degrees Fahrenheit is perfect. And also, because these plants need to focus entirely on fusing together, we don't want them growing. There's two other tips that are really important. Number one, do not water your plants the night before you graft, and do not allow them to have any light for the first couple days. And so that allows the plant to not put any energy towards growing, but rather putting all its energy into healing, which is what we want the plant to do, especially over the next couple days, which are really the most crucial part, because once the fusing happens, usually the plant will survive, and the most likely that the plants die are in the first few days. Yeah.
And there's a question, what rootstock are you using?
So it's a very good question. What rootstock are we using? We use two different types of rootstock. This one is, so let me quickly talk about the potential in grafting. The fruited varieties can have all kinds of shapes and colors in terms of the taste, in terms of the shapes of the fruit. But the rootstock gives you, there are a couple different options. And we grow, these tomatoes are what we call our long season tomatoes. They're going to go into the ground in about a month, and they will be our earliest tomatoes in the ground. And so before April, by the end of March, mid-March to the end of March, these tomatoes will be put in the ground, and they will grow for April, May, June, July, August, September, October. And so it ends up being a 7 to 8 month growing process. When you grow in a heated high tunnel, that's the only way you can really grow a tomato for that long, right? Because in April you're going to get sub-zero temperatures sometimes, and that will just kill your plants in an unheated hoop house. So we use for our 7 to 8 month growing cycle tomato plant, we use the rootstock variety called the DROTX, I believe. You can find it at Johnny Selected Seeds. And that is the one that allows for a prolonged season. For our unheated hoop houses where we grow our heirlooms and we grow our cherry tomatoes, we use the variety called Estamino, Estamino, and that is a Johnny's Selected Seeds variety as well. And that one is done for unheated crops, crops that are grown for up to 6 months. And so that round of tomatoes for our heirlooms and for our cherry tomatoes, we won't start that grafting process for a little bit, and they will go into the ground when in early May. And so that's a shorter growing season, and the Estamino is very appropriate for that kind of growing. And so those are really the two we have used so far. And there are other rootstocks and other seed companies that do different things. Johnny's has just been great. They they give you a lot of technical support as you're going through this process, which can be really, really helpful. Yeah, the Estimino is a great one. The first one is a non-organic variety. The second one is an organic variety. There has been much less research when it comes to greenhouse variety breeding in terms of organic varieties versus non-organic varieties. And so organic is actually finally catching up and giving us some varieties that we can use that have the qualities that are really important to growing a successful tomato crop.
For a home gardener, you still need a healing chamber?
So, as a home gardener, do you still need a healing chamber? Yes, you always will need a healing chamber, because even if it's just, and again, Johnny's is a site, should be getting paid by Johnny's right now, but they sell these domes to put over a flat, where farmers will actually go in there and spray the inside of a dome with a little spray mister, and keep the humidity as high as possible, and keep obviously that dome in a warm place. It's at least 70 degrees, and that is out of the light, especially in the early stages. So there are home gardening grafting kits that can be purchased on at Johnny Selected Seeds. What was that? And yeah, so I think yeah, it is doable. Again, if there is a way to, if you have an old fridge, then any old fridge will work as a perfect healing chamber. And again, just because we're talking about gardening, they make the best germination chambers. If you just find an old fridge and put a old crock pot, that works as well. That would be the cheapest option, an old fridge and an old crock pot. And you just have to buy the temperature sensor, which we will provide a link to where we got ours. There's a bunch of places to get those. That would be the easiest way. That will give you the highest success rate. The domes will work. They will have a lower, and you'll be closer to that 50% margin versus the closer to 90%, which is where we were getting to last year. We actually did our grafting for our first round 2 days ago. Or was that yesterday? That was yesterday. Hard to know. Time goes by so quickly in the spring. And they are in the healing chamber right now. We have all our plants. We have 120 plants in there, and it is too early for me to tell you exactly what our success rate is on those. Yeah. These, just as a quick information, if I could talk quickly about the process after you have grafted the plants, put them in your healing chamber, and they spend that first day without any light and at that 90% humidity. The trick after that is to slowly and gently integrate them back into the vegetative state, meaning that they are going to start growing again, and they're going to try to become healthy plants. And so the way to do that is to slowly integrate light back into them, back on them. And so on the fourth day, after they spend 3 or 4 days in total darkness, we give them about 20 minutes of light and 20 minutes of fresh air. We open the chamber, we let some airflow go in there, and we give them about 20 minutes of light. And then from that point on, from that fourth day, we increase it little bit by little bit. And Dave Trumbull has kind of gave us that guideline of how much to add, and it is, you can kind of, as a gardener, and I'm sure everyone has seen, as you observe the plants, you kind of get to see how they're responding as you change the environmental factors. And so by that observation, we've kind of figured out how much to increase by. And if a day they seem to be not doing so great, we take down the light level a little bit, and then let them recover, and then keep increasing the light level. By the sixth day, we're around to 3 hours of light, and a week and a half later, we're getting close to where they want to be at 12 hours of light. And then they go on that 12-12 cycle, and usually 2 to 2.5 weeks later, they're completely ready to be out of the healing chamber. They're healthy, they're growing, and they're ready to just be potted up into. We usually go from 50 cell flats into 4-inch pots, which will allow them to grow to be about 8 inches tall and be happy and healthy before they live a fantastic life on Sweet Beet Farm. Or your home farm.
Can you talk about watering after the graft?
Watering after the graft. So we don't water before grafting them, but we because in the healing chamber they are at this 95% of humidity, they don't need water right away to survive. There's plenty of humidity for them to absorb that moisture. And when we start, I think on the 3rd day, about when they start getting a little bit of fresh air or whatnot, that's a good time to we have a couple of what we call bottom watering trays, and that's a way to not pour water on the top, but rather just put water on the bottom, on this bottom watering tray, that then just gets absorbed up by the cells. That's a really gentle way to water, and a good way to not disturb the plants as they're still going through their healing process. Oh yes, a very important thing that I should mention: when you plant your grafted tomatoes, do not bury the connection, like where this cut has been done. Well, actually, you'll see it becomes like a scar. It's very obvious where these two plants were joined together. If you plant the tomato, and if that grafting, that spot goes under the soil, the fruited variety will actually send off roots and bypass the rootstock completely, and then you will have voided the whole point of grafting in the first place, because you will not be getting the qualities that you're looking for from the rootstock, if that makes sense. So make sure you plant the tomatoes higher than where they got grafted and where they were put together, if that makes sense.
Questions?
Obviously, this grafting is also an entryway into so many different ways to optimize the life of the tomato plant. There are, when you get into protected growing and you start talking about greenhouses and hoop houses, there are ways to control humidity, there are ways to control the temperature, which can really affect the way that a plant grows. A technical term for this is called crop steering. Going between, and so really, if you are going to graft, I do encourage to get Andrew Mefford's book and to really dive into the ways that you can steer plants in a way to create a balanced plant between generative growth and vegetative growth. And I don't want to get too deep into that, but because there's so many different factors, and one can go as complicated as you want or as simple as you want. Obviously, the more you try to control factors, the more you can control how balanced the plant is, but that can also have its issues and be very time consuming. So we kind of do a balance between those two and try to try to learn as we grow. So yeah. Yeah, we will make sure we send out notes and where we've gotten resources and where we have bought some of the materials, and we'll try to get a little price list going to give you an idea of what this could cost for the home gardener or for the beginning for the beginning farmer. Or the established farmer, whoever is looking to graft. It's really not that complicated, but just with a little education and a little help, it can be a really a pleasant thing to do in the spring, and the result when you get 50% more out of a tomato plant and you're trying to make a living out of it selling tomatoes, it is worth it. I hope this was helpful. Okay, I'm going to pass it on to Farm Super Warrior Julie.
Great. So we do have a few more minutes. If anybody else thinks of any questions, pop them in. I'll give a few send-off messages, and then we can check back in case there's any more. But we want to do more of these webinars. Educating is part of our mission at the Food Hub. So also put in the chat box any other kind of webinars you might be interested in. Maybe we'll send a survey afterwards. You can put it in there. Get your input. We just want to put a plug in for our second round of our farmer apprenticeship program. So if any of you, or if you know any people that might be interested in becoming a farmer apprentice, check it out. All the info is at kearsargefoodhub.org. It's right on the homepage. Send it around. We want to get the word out. It's a really cool program. Learn all the things from us, him mostly. And then there's a really cool upcoming event on March 22nd, which we're calling Learning as We Grow, Reflecting Back, Looking Forward. It's all about, we're going to watch Hannah, our behind-the-scenes gal, who's usually in front of the scenes, which is really interesting. Her TED Talk was amazing, so we're going to watch that. We'll have a Q&A. It's going to be a really cool, just kind of community event that we hope everyone wants to come to. And it's free, and it's on the website. Any last-minute questions, Hannah?
Everyone says great job, very helpful, fascinating,
helpful, fascinating. Thank you so much. We've had fun. Pierre?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll wrap up. Yeah.
And I would say we can, obviously there's probably a way to, you can send, if you have questions, you can send them, and we can also, if I don't have the answer, we do have great connections with farmers. Again, wise farmer Dave Trumbull, who we keep asking questions and advice from, would probably be happy to answer some questions and help us with that. So, thank you.
Great. Thank you.